Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Don Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Licensing for the Ohio State University Technology Commercialization Office. And I'm excited for today's panel discussion because you'll hear stories of hope for the millions of patients suffering from stroke. You'll also hear stories about courage from Dr. Nimji about his drug discovery development to address this major unmet clinical need. You'll hear stories about persistence from Dr. Nimji, as well as Wayne Embry from Rev1 Ventures, and Frank Norris, a senior licensing officer from The Ohio State University. You'll also hear stories about commitment from all of the panelists. And I think what's incredible about what you'll hear today is that the innovations to address stroke spawned from the mind and lab of Dr. Nimji through his academic clinical world. Much, but not all, evolved from exquisite partnership with the Technology Commercialization Office at The Ohio State University, funding from Rev1 Ventures, and a community that surrounded Dr. Nimji and his team to help bring his innovation to where it is today. And so here at the Technology Commercialization Office of The Ohio State University, we're making big investments in supporting people like Dr. Nimji and other incredible clinical and scientific investigators to support them through their commercial translation journey. I'd like to introduce Panya Tesavang, one of the newest members of the Technology Commercialization licensing team, who serves in this new role of Associate Director of Licensing for Health Sciences. Panya.
Thank you, Don. I'm excited to join Ohio State Technology Commercialization Office as Associate Director of Licensing for Health Sciences. As Don stated, researchers and clinicians such as Dr. Nimji are the dedicated experts in the science and medicine who realize that there is a need for new therapies to treat patients. It's through this research that new innovations can reach the market and have an impact on patient populations. As these researchers and clinicians are the experts in the science and medicine, we at the Technology Commercialization Office have expertise in IP and commercialization. We're here to work with the researchers and serve as a resource to collaborate with them to bring their discoveries into the market to address unmet medical needs. Our goal is ultimately to help patients, and the office would like to work in partnership with the research community to achieve that goal. If there are any questions or concerns regarding commercialization, we're here to support the community in the commercialization process. So please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, Don, or anyone at the Technology Commercialization Office. Now I'd like to pass along to Dr. Nimji, who is the featured in the inventor for this showcase.
Thank you very much for your warm words and your commitment to development of scientific ideas, theranostics, therapeutics, and diagnostic tools to better help patients suffering from the myriad of diseases that we see at The Ohio State University Medical Center. I'm privileged to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. And what I'd like to talk about is my journey thus far in translating therapies that are really important to me and what I see every day as a vascular neurosurgeon. The title of the talk is Developing a Stroke Therapeutic, a Lesson in Persistence, but what really should say is Developing a Stroke Therapeutic, a lesson in ongoing, or an ongoing lesson in persistence. And I thought to encapsulate what I do, it's appropriate to demonstrate that the Simpsons have had pictorial representations of everything that I've experienced in my own journey, and we will use them as our guide as we talk through this journey that I've started thus far. These are my disclosures. So the overview talk is really the roadmap that I've had in going from being on the benchtop, developing a therapeutic, determining its application in a medical environment, and then how we get from the benchtop to patents, licensing, biotech startup, funding, and actually get into a clinical trial. So the first thing that we're asked when we have a scientific asset is, does it have a place anywhere in my environment in the clinical sphere? Is it a diagnostic tool? Is it a therapeutic? And what is the value of that invention? What is the problem that it solves? Is that solution novel? Is it in somewhere in the marketplace right now? And if it's not there and it is novel, what exactly is the market of that invention? How many people will use it? So with respect to us here at Basking Biosciences, the work that came out of my partner, Dr. Sullinger's lab and my lab, is that we deal with stroke. And what is the burden of stroke? It's 800,000 strokes in the United States alone, and approximately 15 million people worldwide. So a very large market. Of the patients who are seen with an acute ischemic stroke, only approximately 10% of patients receive acute drug intervention by way of recombinant tissue plasminogen activator, or TPA, and then the other 10 to 20% can actually get their clot removed by someone like me by going through the wrist or the groin artery, snaking a catheter all the way up into the brain and vacuuming that clot out, or intercalating the clot into a stent retriever and pulling it out. That's 20%. The other 80% of patients have no acute therapy available to them because of the limitations of drug therapy currently, i.e. TPA, and with respect to thrombectomy is recognizing patients who actually have a clot that is amenable to being removed. The burden of stroke on society today is it represents the #1 cause of combined morbidity and mortality in the world today. And if we think about what the cost of taking care of a patient who presents with stroke acutely, their long-term deficits that need to be managed, and their loss of productivity because of the effect of the stroke on their lives and their families' lives, by 2030, that annual cost in the United States alone will be $240 billion. So our solution is that we have identified a target in stroke that is seen in the large majority of the clots that are pulled out of the brain. It's a target called von Willebrand factor. So we developed a drug that targets von Willebrand factor and have demonstrated that that drug is able to break open the blood clot better than TPA. And we've developed a second drug that turns the first drug off within 2 minutes. Again, we go back to market. Why is this important? Because the #1 issue with TPA currently is that patients bleed. It happens in a significant number of patients, approximately 5 to 7%, which in and of itself doesn't sound like a big number. However, of the patients who do bleed as a result of getting TPA, 40% of them will die. So having a drug that targets the clot that's in the brain is imperative, and we've accomplished that. And having a ready reversal agent that acts on the drug itself rather than any other target in the body or the body's own hemostatic system provides a level of safety and specificity that is currently not available to our patients today. So then how do we secure the rights to the invention? This is where the Institutional Technology and Commercialization Office of the institution that you are at, or certainly at OSU, it's the TCO. They help you with forming your patent, writing the patent, filing the patent, and maintaining and prosecuting that patent. And at Ohio State, I like to identify these 3 people, and I want to focus on the first person I ever met, who is Frank Norris, and you'll have a chance to hear from him today as well. That Frank not only served for me as the person who I would learn about thinking about intellectual property, filing patents, but he was really my business guru 101. I was on the Norris program from the day I met him. And what I mean by that, and I say that with great affection, is that he really sat down and explained the pathway from the time you have something in your hand that you think would be beneficial to patients to how you are part of a company or translating those ideas to a company that can actually do the work to test it and evaluate for its applicability in the clinical space. And not only was that imperative with respect to learning how to take the science forward, but it really allowed me to gain insight into an entirely new world. I always joke that it took me, after college, it took me 16 years to become a neurosurgeon and research scientist. All that time doing all that, you learn absolutely nothing about this process. And Frank was absolutely imperative and essential in my progress towards that new sphere of learning and development. I also want to recognize Cheryl Turnbull and Art, who are also wonderful in meeting with me regularly and encouraging me to move forward as a physician scientist, or as somebody told me very recently, a doctorpreneur. So how do you then take that valuable asset that now has intellectual property, move it forward, and then try and get to the point where you can push it into a biotechnology company that somebody else will now help you fund to move it forward? What we had here at OSU to do that is we were able to take advantage of an accelerator award that's part of the OSU ecosystem that allows you to develop robust preclinical data that would be valuable to the FDA, that is valuable to potential seed investors, and that allows you to further validate what you're doing closer to the clinical disease state itself. We were fortunate enough to receive one of those accelerator awards. And what we did is we generated the data that was necessary, and it furthered development of the drug towards something that was valuable in a biotechnology setting. But what it also did is it laid the foundation for us to compete for an NIH Translational Research Award, or an SBIR grant. And that allowed us to really move the needle to demonstrating to investors that we had something valuable. And these grants from the OSU Accelerator Award are six-figure grants, and that investment launched a $2.2 million grant from the National Institute of Health that really accelerated, to use the term glibly, the process by which we were going to become a preclinical stage biotechnology company. So this was the work that was most recently done with the SBIR grant. This is where we actually used a preclinical model of large vessel occlusion stroke. And you can see in the first panel, you see the blood vessels on both sides of the brain look great. And then we occlude using autologous clot to basically get rid of the blood flow on one side. We wait 6 hours, which is allowing the stroke to mature for 6 hours. We then gave our drug or a negative control, and then we were able to assess the reperfusion of the vessels because the drug broke up the clot, and look at the effect of the brain by virtue of performing an MRI before ending the experiment. And what we were very thrilled to see after unblinding all the groups was that in the negative control group, the group that didn't receive any drug at all, their vessel didn't open up again. If you look at the group that received the drug, that 62.5% of that cohort demonstrated the blood vessel opening up again, which we were flabbergasted by. We knew we had something valuable and realized that it would be that effective in preclinical models. What that reopening of the blood vessel then demonstrated was that if the blood vessel reopened, as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen in the dark red, that the amount of stroke that is incurred in the brain was reduced. So your infarct volume, the amount of stroke that was seen in the brain, was less than the group whose blood vessel didn't open up at all. So now you have your idea, you have support from not only your institution, but the parts of the institution, in our case, the Technology and Commercialization Office, that can partner with you moving it forward. And now it's time to start your company. And again, I'd like to highlight that that Frank was really helpful in this regard as well. He gave me Frank's pearls of finding your CEO. And it was really interesting because I interviewed probably 15 to 16 CEO candidates for the company. And it's that fine balance. There are some that you would really love to have, but they're not really interested in you because you might be too in the process or because they have other bandwidth. There are people that may be very interested in what you're doing, but may not have the clinical, the work expertise that you need to start a company at this stage. And then finally, after enough CEO speed dating, you can find that perfect match that allows you to move forward. And it starts with, you know, the inventor, then it gets your partner, and before you know it, hopefully you're doing a do-si-do. And with our group, it was me and my close mentor, friend, and partner, Dr. Sullinger. I want to spend a second talking to you about him. He was the gentleman with whom I did my PhD, and he and I thought of further ideas that culminated in this drug development. And he was instrumental in taking me as a mentee and turning into a colleague. I think while he's a brilliant scientist, one of his true assets as a human being is this transition. I don't know how many people can turn their student into their colleague and you know, partner for the last 20 years in this kind of development. But Dr. Bruce Sullinger did that, and he really handed over the initial the reins in terms of the initial development of the company with personnel. And after the speed dating that I mentioned earlier, it resulted in a wonderful partnership with our CEO, Mr. Richard Shea, who, while he's a Notre Dame's fan, I try not to hold that against him. He has a fantastic experience of over 25 years in an early stage biotech, and as I'll show you throughout the course of our presentation today, has really been invaluable in the success of our company thus far. So now you have your small group, you've licensed your asset, your intellectual property for your asset, and now it's time to actually get to the business of raising money so that you can move forward with the clinical trials portion of development for your particular asset. And I think what I found was important, if I speed dated with 15 to 16 CEO candidates, I've spoken, I think I'm up to about 32 different VC firms that evaluate the technology, that you have maybe only one date, maybe multiple dates, maybe it's a fit, maybe it's not. But I think what's important when you're looking at investors is you have to know the valuation of your company, and that valuation that you understand is understood by your VC partner as well. As a company, I think it's really important that you have to know how much money you want to raise. And you can keep raising in terms of a seed round and a Series A, then a Series B, and there's no end to it, but understanding that you have to balance how much money you need to make sure you can ensure the subsequent steps of success of the company versus raising so much that you not only have no ownership of the company, but more importantly, you may not have any say in the company anymore. So it's that really fine balance that just takes time, thought, and consensus with the members of the company at arriving at what that is. And I think as a little bit of an intangible aspect, what's really important as well, that the goals of the company are the same as the goals of the venture firm. And I think that when you're mission driven, it's very easy to find a clear line in where that is and to determine if there's alignment. And if there isn't, then it's whatever your threshold is to accept or walk away from. And Frank will probably remember this as we were going through our journey together, but there were two instances where the person whom we were discussing offered to buy the rights outright. And the first question I asked, I said, well, would you develop it? And he said, well, we'll see, I'm not sure. And I immediately walked away from the table because the goal here for me is to make sure that we provide better care and better options for our patients who are suffering from stroke. I believe that this invention will be a big contributor to that, but and as such, I won't be derailed from that goal. So, you know, who is our partner in that? And that was Rev1, Wayne Embry, and our current VC partner that I work with in the company named Round Keyline. And a bit about Wayne in this regard. This was a meeting that was not really about our company initially. It really came down to what he values as an investor and what I value in an inventor. And that consensus of being mission driven and sharing the same mission became clear at our initial conversation and subsequent conversations, interactions, and partnerships there, and has only strengthened that. And what I would say is that Rev 1 was the first one that went in. And once you have that first VC firm that will go in, that activation energy now goes down, because you have someone on the investment side that believes in you, will advocate for you and work with you, because now they're invested as well. So then you got to develop the company, right? As the company evolves, you have everybody. You have the founding group, you have your investors, and we're fortunate that in addition to Rev 1, we have 3 other investors that are also part of the company now that closed out our seed series raise. You have your key opinion leaders. Again, in our company, we are fortunate that we have the world experts in stroke and clinical trials and thrombosis that we need to see us through. And then you also need management, because someone's actually got to do the work, right? And that's typically your CEO, your chief operating officer, your chief medical officer, of which I've been fortunate to serve since the inception of the company. And then you need your board of directors, which are also really important, and at some level are in part a combination of the other 4 groups, and they together help steer the company to make sure that we're thinking about that all members of the group are rowing in the same direction. And that just helps with efficiency, driving it forward, and making sure that all things are taken care of that each individual silo may not be thinking about. So here's the start of the talk, right? I talked about persistence. So this is just a timeline to give you an idea that none of this happened overnight. The thought of targeting VWF was something that we came up with in 2005. We finally developed the drug and published that experience in 2007. We then did proof of concept in vivo experiments that were completed in 2012. I tried to be artistically progressive and demonstrate that I arrived at Ohio State from Duke University Medical Center in 2014. And you can see that things then accelerated to where we are today. And I'm grateful and proud to share with you all today that as of this conversation right now, we are in phase 1 clinical trials. Our IND was application was approved in the summer of 2021. And we are now on our 3rd cohort in our phase 1A clinical trials, with the final goal of getting these into patients who are affected by acute ischemic stroke and hopefully improve their lives. What have I learned from this journey? First thing, and again, this was Norris 101, develop your team early. Identify who your CEO is going to be. I understand what you need in terms of a team to move forward, and identify those people early. The second thing is to be prepared to learn constantly. What this has been, more than anything for me, has been a constant learning experience. This is where you're not the expert. I don't know what's next. I have to do a lot of listening. I have to do a lot of learning. And it's important to maintain humility throughout this process, so that your mind is open, your eyes are open, and your ears are open to every new opportunity, and avoid every pitfall that you can as you move forward. And the final thing is to take advantage of all the resources available. I hope that one of the things you got out of this talk that I gave is that I tried to utilize my people resources, I tried to utilize institutional resources, and I tried to utilize funding resources to the maximum of our ability, so that we could then translate successfully into the biotech space and ultimately gain more momentum to move things forward. As you can see, and as you can probably imagine, none of this is done alone. This is something that has been a long process. It's involved many people. And when I think about this list, I could talk about even more folks, but understand that it takes a team. One of my favorite sayings is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And with that, I'd like to introduce Wayne Embry, who's the Executive VP, Investment and Venture Acceleration for Rev1 Ventures. Wayne?
Shai, thank you very much. Our plan here is to keep this short so that we can spend more time answering questions. But real quickly, Rev1 enjoys a very effective strategic partnership and relationships with both Ohio State University and Nationwide Children's, focused on identifying technologies and opportunities that are ready to begin the process of moving from the lab into commercial become a commercial opportunity, and worked with inventors like Shai to help build out the concept, to build out the team, the business plan, and what the company's going to need for funding. For those of you who don't know, Rev1 is a startup studio located here in Columbus, and we focus on providing critical services, programs, and advice to entrepreneurs and investigators at the research institutions. We have about $130 million in capital under management, several dedicated funds, which are specifically focused on opportunities coming out of OSU or NCH or both. And if you can go to the next slide, this represents some, not all, but some of the opportunities that we've participated in commercializing out of both institutions. Several of these have matured to the point of exit. Some have failed, but the vast majority are still operating companies and performing quite well. So it's a working relationship we're very enthusiastic about. It's something we work on every day, and it's a thrill to work with PIs like Shai, who have the ability to know how they can best contribute to the commercialization of their technology, and then are actively involved in that. So last slide. And so that's my contact information. We collaborate every day with the folks at TCO and at the various colleges, and would love to talk to you if you have ideas for commercialization. And with that, I'll turn it over to Frank Norris, and then be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you, Wayne. So I'm Frank Norris of the infamous Norris program, which is really not like a Paris Island brutal boot camp. It's fairly benign, but we've had a wonderful relationship with Dr. Nimji. It's been going on for 5 years. Next slide, please. I call my talk here, which will be brief, 5 years and 7 minutes, our journey with Dr. Nimji. I'm really just going to add some color to the very comprehensive talk that Shai just gave. And really that is to give you a sense of kind of an insider look at what it's like to work with the TCO, primarily to give you a sense of how you might do the same thing, and you might essentially accomplish something much like what Dr. Nimji has accomplished. That's really the point here. And there are 4 things I'll just touch on very quickly with some kind of color. 4 critical steps: funding, patents, investors, and licensing. Next slide, please. So in terms of funding, Dr. Nimji disclosed his invention to us in June of 2016. This was a co-invention with Bruce Sullinger, his partner at Duke. So it's jointly owned by Duke and OSU. And almost immediately, we introduced Shai to the National Center for Accelerated Innovation, which was a experimental program by NIH for funding fast-track innovations into the market. Shortly after the program director had her first meeting with Shai, she came back to me and said, That is the best meeting I've had in months of interviewing prospective project PIs. It's exciting science. What a cool guy to work with. So Shai diligently put in an excellent proposal. Surprisingly, it was initially rejected. The program director told me in confidence, we use external reviewers. 1 of 6 dinged Shai, we believe, because he had what he considered a competing technological approach. And so you have Shai repropose, and he will get an award. We're not going to let that sidetrack this. So indeed, Shai reproposed and got a $150,000 award, which funded his mouse model work. And then in the middle of his work on that, he applied for the Accelerator Award, which is an OSU award. That's strictly for OSU faculty. And the purpose is to fund inventions that are candidates for a startup in the state of Ohio. So for instance, there were issues we had to deal with. Some of the reviewers wanted to be sure that Shai's partner, Dr. Sullinger, was okay if he got the award with putting a startup in the ground in the state of Ohio. Dr. Sullinger obviously is in North Carolina at Duke. So that was satisfied. And of course, that's the situation now. It worked out beautifully. So Dr. Nimji got his $100,000 award, which funded Keyline work. And then, as he described, he also ultimately applied for the Small Business Innovation Research Phase 2 award, a beautiful award totaling $2.2 million. And this is diligence. I mean, Shai never missed a beat, and you can see it was a beautiful succession of funding. Next slide, please. Just a quick remark about patenting. This is kind of a behind the scenes drama that is really perpetuated by the universities, by external patent counsel, with a lot of input from the inventors. And the bottom line is you have to get commercially meaningful patent claims to have an investable startup entity. So we had the patent filed, and periodically we would hear from the patent examiner what he's rejecting, what he might allow. And for Shai, the key here was the sequence of nucleotides in his aptamer. So we would sit holding our breath, waiting to hear from the patent examiner about what he might allow, in particular, the sequence in the aptamer. And for instance, we'd get an office action from the examiner saying, well, looks like I may give you sequence number 1, 3, and 7. We would call Shai, holding our breath, saying, Shai, what sequence of in your aptamer is working now? What's critical? And he would say, well, looks like sequence number 3. We'd look in the examiner report, and he would say, yeah, we're okay with 3, and there'd be high fives everywhere. So that's kind of the drama that's never seen. But you know, we now have the issued patent issued in January of this year. It was a 4-year process, but that's why we call it sweating out the sequences. Next slide, please. So then by the way, this should say investor getting it right, and Shai really elaborated on this. And just a couple of colorful pieces here. I introduced Shai to a couple of substantial entrepreneurs about 6 months after he disclosed his invention. I took them over. They met with him near his office. They loved his presentation, and their immediate reaction was, hey, we'll run with this, Dr. Nimji. We're good to go. We can do this. But their perspective was, oh yeah, and Dr. Nimji, you and your partner, Bruce Sullinger, you can consult, you know, you'll have some voice in this. And as Shai mentioned, even at this point, he had a pretty good idea what was going to work and what he wanted. And, you know, he needed to have a say in the company. He didn't mention this, but actually he and his partner had a very interesting experience with a prior company where they learned a lot of lessons about who you're working with. It better be the right person, and who makes critical decisions. If it gets out of your hands, it can be destructive. So Shai immediately realized this will not work. So we abandoned that. And I still hear from those entrepreneurs to this day complaining about why they didn't get the nod. But now a very interesting point, the second line, and a year later, a prominent East Coast VC firm visited Duke University. They were very interested in the technology. Shai phoned in to that meeting, and it shows you how what Shai described as knowing the value of your technology. Shai knew it at that point, and the first thing the VC people did was try to throw some shade on the possible value of the technology, obviously to tee themselves up for a better deal if they turn this into a startup. And they said, oh, we have our dream team of PhDs. Here's what we've learned about the technology. It could have some problems. Shai jumped in, being an MD PhD. It was like, guys, you're behind the times. Your information's out of date. I'm a clinician as well as a PhD. I know I don't care whether you're a dream team or not, you're dreaming in the wrong direction, because here's the way it is. And that shut them up. And the meeting went well from there on out. But sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. And then almost a year later, in January 2019, I called up Wayne Embry and I said, hey, Wayne, I got somebody that I think you want to talk to. In this case, it was a little bit like going to a record producer and saying, hey, guy, I've got a young kid that you probably want to talk to. Here's what he's got. Here's what he's playing. And they say, oh, yeah, who's that? Well, he's a guy named Elvis. Talk to him. Well, in this case, Wayne jumped on the opportunity, and you can see what's happened. A beautiful relationship, highly productive. And then the final thing I'll mention here is what blew me away was in terms of Shai's persistence and in January 2020, he took off valuable time from his 24/7 neurosurgical position to fly out to San Francisco and jump into the ultimate shark pit, the JP Morgan annual healthcare conference, and pitch his company to, I think it was 10 to 15 different VC groups. Obviously, they listened. He's a wonderful presenter, and ultimately it resulted in a very substantial funding. But for an inventor to do that is truly extraordinary. I'm not sure I've seen it happen before, but I think the moral to the story is sometimes you have to do something truly extraordinary to get what you want to get. So next slide, please. And finally, in terms of licensing, this is complex, and it involved OSU, Duke University, obviously Basking Biosciences, who wanted the license, but everybody has an agenda. So when you're trying to negotiate the license deal, Basking has an agenda, OSU has an agenda, Duke has an agenda. And in this case, they were prospective investors looking over our shoulders. They had their own agenda. What's funny was early on in the process, we were having a call, and Duke was having a meeting with Bruce Sullinger, Shai's partner, to talk about terms. And Shai jumped in and said, oh, well, if I can make the meeting, we'll knock all this out in one meeting. Well, as you can see, the license took over a year actually to execute. And Shai, it was funny because he would contact me and he'd say, Frank, what's going on here? What's dragging this out? He said, in my business as a neurosurgeon, you see the problem, you make a decision, you don't have the options to delay things. People's lives are in your hands. What are these people doing? So that was just a lesson Shai had to learn. And that was a lesson more in patience than persistence. But then there are a number of comments Shai made in the process that can't be repeated in polite company, but he basically muscled it through, and in August of last year, everything was done. Next slide, please. So this is us, and these are our fantastic individuals. And we love to hear about exciting research ideas. We love to come and see you, talk about them, whether it's just conceptual or whether it's farther along in prototype. But just as we did with Shai, and I'm sure he would love to see it happen for his colleagues, we can help you from start to finish. Sometimes it requires a lot of interaction, sometimes very little. It could be a startup, or it could be a license to an established company. But we love to work with you. And next slide, please. So that's who we are. That's our URL. And we love coming to you, seeing what you're doing in your lab, hearing your ideas, your vision, whether it's something you want to jump into immediately or something you might consider in 6 months or a year. We love it. So, we're at the southeast corner of campus, but we love coming to you and see what you're doing and talking to you. So that's it for me. And why don't we go to Q&A? There we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this inspiring story by Dr. Nimji, and thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Frank. I'd like to invite the entire panel to come back so we can have our Q&A session. We have a few questions for you, and I also want to invite Carolyn Crisafilli, my co-host, to come. She represents the Keyline Center for Entrepreneurship. So the first question is directed to you, Dr. Nimji, and that was from one of our attendees. How did you approach your go-to-market strategy? What factors drove your decision to create a startup versus licensure or partnership?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. And I think when you are trying to take an idea forward, the two options that the individual questions are exactly that. Do you partner with an industry or do you go alone? Industry does actually not have a huge appetite for true innovation. Something that's established, it moves, that's big and it moves slowly. And that is not a great vehicle for something that is truly novel, that is a paradigm shift, and that offers stuff that's currently not available. And so often, because of when something is that new and that novel, it's viewed by larger institutions as being higher risk. And so, what you tend to have to do is you have to go on your own, in this case, a biotechnology company, and you end up by making progress. You and I call it progress. They call it de-risking. And so, you de-risk your invention such that now the big, established places say, oh yeah, we want to acquire that and take it over the finish line. And so because of how novel our approach was, we knew that we'd have to go it alone. The idea of going to market, it's if I understand the question correctly, is how do you take a scientific idea and get ready to present it to VC and to others, if I understand the question correctly. And there is something that's very, very important. Actually, Frank talked about this. He kept on talking about a deck. You have to get your deck. You have, getting your deck right. And I didn't understand this because in the world of academia, that's your PowerPoint presentation, right? So in the world of biotech and industry, it's called your deck. And so it's really important that you build your presentation deck that includes your mission statement, that includes your why, that includes your how, and that has not only a scientific and clinical plan, but has a very finely tuned business development plan. And it's really hard to have a finely tuned business development plan if you don't have someone on your team who understands business development. So, our part didn't come together until we actually had our core group. And again, our CEO was fantastic in developing our business development plan that resulted in our series seed raise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I have another question now for Wayne and Frank. When you first came across, so both of you take a short time to answer. When you first came across Dr. Nimji, what about his idea or his passion drove you to understand the value of this innovative solution?
Well, I can, one thing that Dr. Nimji has not mentioned was, and which he explained to me in great detail early on, was there was some early a prior early startup. Shai, I don't know if you want to mention that, but that served as some proof of principle of where this could go. Why don't you briefly mention that? Because I think it's significant, and particularly what you learned from that, which I think is critical in terms of that's what shaped the way you approached your both the potential CEO as well as investors.
Yeah, I think, I was involved in my PhD in doing some of the preclinical work on another drug development program that resulted in what was started as a very successful biotechnology company. And this was something that was started again by Bruce Sullinger. In addition to all the hats he wears, he is actually a serial inventor himself. And what I watched happen from actually the front row was a company with technology that was super sound, that had a wonderful clinical space, that I think did not ultimately reach their final success because of a problem with the invention or a problem with the space that we were putting it in. It had a problem with too many people who became less interested in the science and the clinical space and became more interested in profit margins and other things that weren't about bringing things to patients. And I promised myself that if I ever had that opportunity, I would never be derailed by a dollar. And I think to this point, everybody who works with me would say that's true. Frank is kind in saying what he said. I have turned down, and Bruce has turned down 6- and 7-figure offers to just let this go. But that's not what my goal is. Money won't make patients get better from strokes. This drug will.
Wow, thank you. That is wonderful. Wayne, do you want to share your comments?
Sure. So I sit on the Accelerator Award Committee. So I got to meet Dr. Nimji and hear his plan at that stage. And then in January of 2019, when we met, I was very candid with Shai and said, point blank, I hate stroke. The clinical train wreck that we've seen in this country with stroke is huge. But one of the things that Shai was patient and willing to do is walk through the data with me in quite a bit of detail. And so understanding the results that he had produced, the willingness to have those results validated, and the clarity on what the clinical endpoints would be for these compounds. And the important thing is not just one, but there are 2 compounds here that make up this drug and this opportunity. And so after really understanding that and the clarity that was that program and Shai's approach, it made sense, and we got involved enthusiastically.
Thank you so much.
Shai, one other thing that I think is worth your repeating, you alluded to it briefly in your talk. One thing that really impressed me was, like you said, if you want to go far, you get a team. Right out of the blocks, you locked on who you wanted, for instance, your scientific advisory team or your medical advisory team to be. And these were not sort of casual acquaintances. You might mention who. I mean, that was to me highly significant. Why don't you mention that? Yeah.
So I'll go straight from the top to answer, Frank. So our clinical advisory board is really made of world experts. On our clinical advisory board, one person has had to leave. And that person's had to leave because he was just appointed by President Biden to lead the FDA. So, we had Rob Califf, who was on our clinical advisory board, and he's now leading the FDA. Our other clinical advisory board members are Bob Harrington, who is the chairman of Stanford Medicine and past president of the American Heart Association. We have Broderick, who's the head of clinical stroke at University of Cincinnati, who basically was one of the 4 neurologists in the world who brought TPA to the marketplace in the 1980s and 1990s. We have Bruce Campbell, Pooja Khatri, Michael Hill, who are all world-class clinical trialists in stroke today, and they represent 3 leaders from 3 different countries, Australia, the United States, and Canada, respectively, in running national clinical trials program. And we have Rick Becker, who has been a clinical trialist in early stage clinical trials for almost every anti-clotting drug for like the last 30 years. So, these are people who have a tremendous amount of respect, worldwide recognition, and they came in on a prayer because they believe in the technology. And that's probably the most humbling part of all this for me.
Wow. We have two questions that came in from the audience. I do want to focus on those two questions. And the first one, I would like Dawn and Panya to pay attention because you might need to respond. So Dr. Nimji, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently to speed up the process? And I would like to add too, looking back, if we could grant you 3 wishes, or magically to fix barriers or issues you faced along the way, what would they be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me answer your second question first. I'm gonna go out of order. I promise I'm more organized than I sound each time I answer these second questions first. But I think how institutions can help scientific inventors is we need to value the translatability of scientific ideas into biotech startups. I think that the OSU Technology and Commercialization Office was actually ahead of the rest of the medical center. Like they were more progressive, they understood, they provided enormous learning opportunities and support for me to go forward. But the whole institution needs to value that. It has to come at every level. Departmentally, I've had that support. My department of neurosurgery, I have an extraordinarily supportive chair, and my 2 vascular neurosurgical colleagues have been incredibly supportive with their time and their flexibility with me. But the institution needs to be supportive, and we need to do this. I'm very encouraged when President Johnson joined OSU, that she has made that one of her hallmark goals was to make Duke into just a huge incubator. But that needs to be valued. Scientists and investigators need to be, when you get an SBI grant, when you achieve patent and license IP, that needs to be recognized by the institution so that you can have academic progression in your career while you're trying to do something, because nobody's giving you extra time to do this. This is part of your 24/7. So you got to find it and make it work, which is fine, but it also, if the institution supports it with professional recognition, progress forward, physical and financial resources to keep going, that would be helpful. And I got so passionate about the second answer to the question, I forgot the first one.
Anything you would have done differently?
What would no, and I say no, because you can't expect smooth sailing, right? Like as long as you keep your finger on the pulse of this entity, this thing that you're moving forward, you're gonna have bumps in the road. I think the only thing I would have said if I ever stopped working or if I ever slowed down, then I probably would have had regret. But every bump, every seeming failure or block, that was a learning experience and then a subsequent pathway to success. So to say I wish this had happened and wish that had happened, I think would be disingenuous, because you have to learn this process. And the fact of the matter is, and I want to remind everybody on this call, we're not done. This is phase 1. We have 2 more phases. We have growth, development, funding, transition, and there's much more to come. I lost my hair on the first leg, so I don't think there's much more to lose. Maybe you'll see more wrinkles the next time, but that's the way this process works.
Wonderful, thank you. Dawn, do you have any words of affirmation to what Dr. Nimji expressed about institution-wide support for inventors like him, especially clinician inventors who treat our patients and understand the seriousness of their life-saving component of their invention? Dawn?
Right. From the institutional support, really it's teams coming together, getting around the vision and understanding the problem that is being addressed in the marketplace, as Dr. Nimji mentioned, and providing just the right amount of support and expertise to help that faculty innovator reach their vision and goals.
Wonderful, thank you. Panya, do you have anything else to add as our new Associate Director for Life Sciences?
Yes, I would echo what Don said. researchers and clinicians like Dr. Nimji. They're the experts. They're the one that treat the patients and do the innovative research. And we want to serve as a resource to them in our work as IP managers and commercialization people. So we want to be collaborative and ensure that what they're working on reaches the market and impacts patients' lives.
Thank you so much. We do have one more question from the audience. Most likely that'll be the last one, unless Dawn or anyone else has a question for the team. The question is, do you have any plans, Dr. Nimji, to expand this technology in different diseases or any other different purposes?
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question. And the answer is yes. As you grow a company, a single asset for a single purpose has a very life cycle. And what you want to generate is a platform. And you can generate platforms two ways. You can take the technology, i.e. the way you create a drug, and you can develop it across disease states, or you can take a single target, in this case, we have a Willebrand factor, and demonstrate its impact with respect to its inhibition in multiple diseases. And whatever your skill set is, or whatever you have available in the most advanced progression, that's what you put forth first in terms of plat development. And we have done the latter. Von Willebrand factor has been implicated in a number of diseases, including cancer, thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, DVT, and in fact, a very, very significant implication in COVID-related organ failure, microvascular thrombosis and organ failure related to COVID. And so we are now setting up an entire platform to facilitate those endeavors so that we are able to move forward as a platform-based company rather than as a single asset, single disease company.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you all panelists. Now I'd like to bring Carolyn Crisafilli from Keyline Center of Entrepreneurship to close out with some final comments.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Don and Panya, for bringing us together, starting us out for this terrific presentation today. And a special thank you to Dr. Nimji. What an inspirational journey. Your dedication is just amazing, and you're such an inspirational story. Wayne and Frank, thank you for highlighting the fabulous resources and highlighting the team that's necessary for moving these innovations forward. Just a couple of quick announcements here for other opportunities that our audience may be interested in. There is an outstanding opportunity through WashU in St. Louis, the E4B program, or Entrepreneurship for Bioscience. This is a free online semester-long course dedicated specifically to bringing biomedical and healthcare innovations to the marketplace. Another opportunity is I-Core Ohio. That is a program that's run over the summer here at OSU. There is two informational sessions coming up in January 6th and January 12th to give you more information. Registration for this is due by January 16th, and you can get more information on those two. Their address is icoreohio.org, so you can get more information online. And we hope that you'll join us next month when we'll be highlighting Ken Yeager, and we will be warm introduction by Peter Moeller. That presentation is going to be on January 18th, again from noon to 1 p.m. The CCTS Innovator Showcase is co-presented by the Ohio State University Office of Innovation and Economic Development and Nationwide Children's Office of Technology Commercialization. The Translation Innovation Program has a number of mission partners. If you're interested in joining this endeavor, please reach out to us. We would be happy to include you in our programming. A final thank you for joining us. The CCTS Showcase is underwritten by the CTSA grant. And finally, we would like to wish you all a very happy new year, and we hope to see you again at the beginning of 2022. All the best and happy holidays.